Hello, everybody. This is episode 58 of our podcast, Artificial Intelligence and Cybersurgery. I'm Andrew Gums. I'm here with my co-host, Professor Dr. Vincent Grasso, and he'll introduce our next guest. We are the official podcast of our journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery, the first journal to focus exclusively on all things, as Vincent says. I keep stealing your catchphrase.
Thank you.
Artificial intelligence and surgery. Sorry, Vincent, you'll have to make something up on the fly now.
No, it's no worries. Thank you, Andrew. It's a great pleasure, Colin, to have you on our podcast. We usually have surgeons and clinicians and whatnot, but it's so important for our audience to listen to, experts such as yourself in the med tech and robotic surgery arena. You have a formidable background, a business development background, commercialization background. I'm sure our audience is very excited to listen to your story. So please introduce yourself properly, and thanks for joining the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, chaps. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Vincent. So my name's Colin Eke. I've recently only just met with yourself, Vincent, over the past week gone by. Andrew, I've known you for quite a while now. The way to describe myself is I'm one of the kind of legacy people that work within the previous sales, more commonly known as commercial teams within medtech. I say legacy because I've been doing this now. First job straight out of high school. Finished my A-levels, went straight in and cut my teeth in the very complex world of vascular sales. And thrown in very much at many deep ends, which at the time was quite terrifying, to be honest with you, but proved to be very beneficial. And I've stayed within this industry all the way through to today, and I see taking myself through probably at least the next 10 years or so, God willing, within this sector. Many changes along the way. After 7 or 8 years within vascular, I decided, right, I think orthopedics looks quite an interesting topic for me. So I did a bit of swatting up. Back in those days, it was much easier to go and contact a company, have a meaningful chat, and potentially a position becomes, ready-made available. That's how it used to sort of rock in the world. Slightly different now. Worked in orthopedics, but what was of interest for me back in the time when I joined orthopedics was there was a lot of move towards computer-assisted orthopedic surgery. And at that time, it's a bit like robotic surgery is today. It's the new, fresh, very popular, very fashionable thing. So computer-assisted operated orthopedics is ultimately at the time was to use a navigation system that would take all of the anatomical landmarks of that particular patient, match it up with the implant that we were working with, and then get the exact cuts, the exact angles, the millimeters here, millimeters there.
When was that?
And then they would cut
that,
according
Colin?
to that.
What
Pardon?
period was that? Just
what
years?
That's probably going all the way back now to I should know this off the top of my head, Andrew. This is around the sort of 2002, 2004, around that sort of timing.
Okay. It's very interesting. I was just at a conference in Paris, Chirurgie 4.0, organized by the French Academy of Surgeons, and they had a lot of presentations from the orthopedic surgeons, and I was amazed at all the stuff they had, but I was also I didn't want to bring it up there, but I was also amazed at how much easier it is to bring AI and navigation in solid structures. And I almost wanted to make an off-the-cuff remark, but I didn't, about how Vincent, you can help me with this, but I almost wonder if it is a reflection of this is going to get me in trouble, how much easier orthopedic surgery is, or surgery on bone is, than on surgery on soft tissue structures. Is really just and the way I come to that conclusion is how much faster they were able to incorporate navigation and AI in the procedure. Is that a fair or just a dangerous a way of looking at things, Vincent?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the architecture of a joint can be positioned in space, more accurately for, for other than the human hand with a scalpel to engage and perform a procedure. The soft organs in the abdomen, especially bowel, right? There's air inside, it moves around. You get a CAT scan, 3 seconds later, things could have moved around. You don't have that rigidity. So ortho was the perfect medium for this entry, so as you stated. So cool.
And I think actually, guys, looking back now at the time, knowing what we kind of know about AI, I think there's a huge amount that we don't know, but what we do know, we're probably doing that at the time actually with navigation, because you're feeding into a computer, lots of specific measurements, and out pops a pretty much sort of ready-made guide route map that what you should be doing to get that exact alignment, which would then have clinical benefits, for longevity. So, but they didn't know that at the time. They just thought this was computer assisted, and to have some precision. So, that was fascinating. And back in orthopedics, that's when it started to change into kind of gender-specific implants or patient-specific implants, which still I think goes forth and tries to develop. But then robotics became very much involved within the sort of next generation of computer-assisted surgery. And I think now, if you look at the navigation systems in orthopedics, they are still used very much, but things for very precise movements in cervical spine, and certainly up in neurosurgery as well. But in terms of standard knee, hip replacement, shoulder replacements, there are robotic solutions now that we know in terms of what is robotics, that are used very much common thread. I think the manual orthopedics is non-existent, whereas a lot of soft tissue surgeons that we're just referring to, they still do a lot of open surgery, which could be the kind of analogy. But yeah, that was interesting. And then the natural progression from computer-assisted surgery was to go into robotics, and I joined Intuitive Surgical, getting involved with selling the Da Vinci and the rest really.
Where were you selling mainly?
I was under the kind of European remit, but my sort of physical base was within UK and Ireland, and that was an amazing experience. I think there's a lot of negativity towards Da Vinci and Intuitive over the years, and maybe to some degree that exists. But all I can say from a reasonably trained eye expert within the commercial field within robotics, it is a very powerful system. It clearly is.
What are you getting at, Colin?
Well, I'm just negativity. I think the same would apply to any organization, any industry sector where you have a monopolized player. And remember, from the year 1998 all the way through to probably only 4 or 5 years ago, to be fair, the monopoly still existed. And they've done very, very well. They've done very well in terms of a business. They've developed the business superbly well. You could argue, have they restricted their design ethoses purely because they had the monopoly? That's for maybe a different day's discussion. But I joined Intuitive, spent a long time with them, learned a huge amount, and I still to this date, I can certainly say that no other company has ever taught me as much as I learned, from an anatomical and clinical perspective, for sure, as much as Intuitive did. After leaving Intuitive, I got involved with, still within robotics, but doing a lot of consulting work with some of the other companies that were in R&D, and did some consulting work with Medtronic at the time, which had just converted from Covidien, which is now obviously known as the Hugo, Titan Medical, and also CMR Surgical, which is a company actually I decided to join and headed up the commercial team and stayed with them for getting close to 7.5-8 years. And that was interesting. It was interesting to see how you would tackle that monopolized player, coming up with a slightly different design, different approach. Did they get everything right? Have they got everything right? No. Will they develop that in the future? Potentially, time will tell. But I think now what you see is those ripples of other companies coming through. There's more of a tidal surge now, with many other companies coming through into that robotic space from all parts of the world, not just the US, clearly, or the UK. So it's very interesting times now, and how much is AI involved in robotics? I'm not the expert to necessarily say that. However, what I would say is there's a huge amount of people and companies out there within many spaces, but we're talking about robotics here and now, that think they know what AI stands for.
Oof.
And
Yeah.
I would doubt very much many of those people fully know what is going to be applicable and how can they forge AI into that particular portfolio.
Well, as you know, I mean, the main problem is the incorrect utilization of the term robotic, you know. So
Sure.
so you know, we can you know, we're actually doing a consensus conference. My goodness, it's in February or March. I have to check on the date to try to get some consensus because I mean, you know, the time has come. You know, before there was just Da Vinci, so okay, they want to call it the robot, fine. But now that there's so many other different types of robots, the time to get the correct definition is coming. You know, obviously people have hinted at it, but it's gotten a little bit ridiculous now.
No,
But go
I
go ahead.
agree, Andrew. No, I was just going to say I totally agree with you. If I had $1 for every time I had a constructive discussion with a surgeon over the last 15, 17 years in robotics, as we know it, that question saying it's not really a robot, is it? Let's be honest. You know, a robot is something that you program, you press a button, and you can go off and come back 4 or 5 hours later. That time, in my opinion, probably won't be within our career lifetime, maybe our own personal lifetime. So it's not a robot, but stuck, that tagline is stuck, and I can't see that tagline ever going away because it's a very appropriate marketing tagline, and it becomes fashionable. So I think we're stuck with it. What we now need to do to do the right thing is to distinguish exactly those parameters that you alluded to. But that's going to be more of a challenge, not one that you can't win, but it's going to be a challenge.
I mean, it's becoming more of a head because of the concept of AI, right? You know, that's the whole point of our journal is to explain people what robotics is, what AI is, what autonomy is, how is it different from something that's automatic and what have you. But in the interest of time, I wanted to talk to you about how realistic is it for companies now? We know of many companies that have come and gone in you know, we'll use the term robotics just so we can continue. How wise is it for companies to try and take on Intuitive and the Da Vinci in your opinion? And what are maybe some of the ways that a company could actually create something worthwhile on the market?
I think it's going to be difficult for many, not all. There will be companies that can sustain themselves, you know, either because they've got huge financial backing. You have companies in the market right now which may perceptively be reasonably successful, but they are likely to face big challenges over the next few years. And it's not challenges that um, because everybody wants to buy the monopolized player. That's not the case. They want to have something fresh and some change, but it's about competing with the legacy, and that's very difficult for companies to do. Where I think there is a golden opportunity is for companies to create a slightly different paradigm. So instead of just building something else which looks similar, it might have a different size dimension, it might be colored differently, but you've still got a console system with a machine that's got 1, 2, 3, 4 arms, and you do surgery, aka as what Intuitive have developed since 1998. You can create something different where you are offering the same or very close to same some of the benefits. So as long as you've got some good vision, you've got 3D as an option. Not everybody wants 3D, but 2D or 3D with a 4K image. But you've got the ability to have some stability. You can have some things such, and I'm fully aware of a company that is launching right now that has some very clever tracking capabilities where the camera will automatically track the instrument. So what that actually does is the arm would hold something rock solid and still, which is an advantage of robotics as we know it. And secondly, if it tracks, that's an advantage because that's somebody else taking somebody else having to do that, and they can concentrate on some other part of the procedure. So it has the efficiency tick. That's where I think by offering some elements of what we know as in robotics is going to be the big opportunity for the market. Because remember, Andrew, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of robots around the world, but it's a fraction percentage of how many hospitals there are. And that I think is the big challenge, because in many countries, like in India, for example, there's nearly 80,000 hospitals that could be applicable to have some form of advanced minimal invasive technology like a robot. But there's only around, I don't know the exact number to date, but let's call it 100, 120 robots. It's a fraction. And you can replicate that across all continents around the world. So
and each hospital has how many operating rooms?
you
Maybe
got
a
it.
robot, but they have 10 other operating rooms with no robot. It's
Yeah, and my country is a good example. There's 220, 230 robots in the UK. And some hospitals have 5 or 6, 7 robots. But there's many, the lion's share of robots still are restricted to only use it 3 or 4 times a week. So 3 or 4 patients. So that's one morning list, one afternoon list, etc. That's not good because of the cost constraints. So the opportunity out there, to answer your question, is to find elements of what works well, take away the elements that don't work well, and to have some blended mix or hybrid technology. And don't forget as well, there's many parts around the world that don't have access to robotics, probably more than they actually do have access to robotics. So that untapped market, undelivered market, is an opportunity for such a design that I'm referring to. And I think that is where companies will succeed, rather than just trying to copy and paste and change a few things and still be then having a dogfight with a company that pretty much owns the market and probably always will for many, many years. That, I think, is the opportunity that companies have.
Before I want to get Vincent to ask you some questions, I always keep meaning to ask you, do you remember when we first met, or around what year we first met, or how we first met? Was it through CMO? Was it when I already
well, you'll probably give me some factual correction here, where we met many, many years prior. My recollection right now was when I was actually at CMR.
Right.
And I think you were very keen to get a system into 1 or 2 of your sort of destination countries where you're going to be working. I think that was the original time, but there may well be some time in the distant past where our paths crossed. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
It's hard. I think it's when I moved to Paris about 6 years ago.
It could have been,
think.
yeah, around that time. Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
all right. So I'm not losing it. So Vincent, what do you think is the future of robotics from your perspective?
Well, I remember when when we did our residencies and fellowship, I remember we were a beta site for the Da Vinci stuff back then. And I was struck by the surgeon disconnected from the operating room, so to speak, being next to the patient, right? There was this disconnection from the console to, and I remarked back then, I said, wow, this is an interesting change. Like, surgeon's not in the room, or it's just you were disconnected from the procedure emotionally, perhaps there was a disconnect. So I've always been a fan of that the art and the science of surgery. There's a human element to it, getting the surgeon back, kind of, so to speak, in the room, or with part of that experience with the patient, and rather than being at a distance. I see as something interesting, intriguing, that the market, I think, would resonate around. People would resonate around knowing that their surgeons, next to them, using some advanced technology, and it's kind of, there's something comforting about that, right? As a patient, as a family member, I don't know, Colin, that always struck me as an interesting disconnect when I was a young fellow.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when you join Intuitive, and I don't think they've ever changed this remit, everybody has to go to California to their head office for, I think it was about 5.5, 6 weeks. It was fully residential, 7 days a week, at least 18 hours a day, it seemed. And you're learning and learning and learning. But the the three elements that they always drum home to you, which is, vitally correct, is the benefits of robotics from their eyes is vision, control, and dexterity. It isn't about X number of arms, or it's not about 100 different instruments or a very comfortable chair. It's vision, dexterity, and control. So if you get good vision system with a technology, you've got some form of dexterity in terms of the ability to mimic your human wrist somehow. And you've also got the control mechanism, which is by giving stability. They're the three fundamentals. So I think that if everybody takes those raw ingredients and then creates something which is completely different, but still has those three ticks, that is the opportunity that I think will create the next 5 to 10 years of success in this particular advanced minimal invasive. But you're right, it's a big learning jump to disconnect yourself from that patient. I was working in several UK hospitals. Actually, the surgeon console with the Da Vinci was outside the OR. It was in a different room. As long as the cables were long enough, they could do that. And did it have an effect on any of the patients? Probably not. It just at the time getting used to into that frame of mind. But surgeons take to it very quick. Usually after 20, 30 procedures, they're pretty comfortable with that. Not everyone's the same, but you are right to take that first observation, definitely.
One of the things we're actually studying here in France, and other people have already done this, but I want to focus a little bit more on it for more, complex surgeries, is really, is it the robot? Is it the Da Vinci, or is it the 3D vision? A lot of people in laparoscopy haven't really embraced 3D vision because the earlier versions were not very good, to be honest. But the current versions now are really phenomenal. So, the question is it really the Da Vinci, or is it the 3D image?
It's a great question, Andrew. And I take you back to those three pillars that I've just described. It's the vision, dexterity, and control. And the vision, the depth perception you do get with the Da Vinci is pretty good. It's pretty awesome, if I'm honest. But that's not necessarily because it's the way it's delivered. But you've also got great capabilities of having 3D with other modularities as well. You're right with laparoscopy. Well, up until very recently, they're very big, the cameras, hugely heavy. It's quite cumbersome. You get good vision, but I think you're right. Is it the experience is delivered because you've got good quality vision? And I think that's very important with robotics. But it doesn't mean because you've got to sit down at a particular angle, or you have a really comfy chair scenario, how can you take that same vision quality in a slightly different format? And it's all about creating something which maybe is more modular, maybe it's smaller, but it's hugely less expensive. Because then if it's less expensive, then thousands and thousands more hospitals would have it.
Yeah, you can actually use it. I'm a little bit amused by the last term, control. Now, if you think about it, the surgeon is at the console and completely dependent on an assistant to change the instruments, to use the suction device, to put in another trocar if the patient needs a stomy, colostomy or something.
It's not a solo sport. You're right. Their interpretation of control is the fact that you can have the ability to control 4 arms. 2 at one time. You've got the third one retracting. You can bring the other arm in if you wish to. But it's the more controlling kind of the control center that you're then going to be able to move some things in without actually having to disrupt too much at patient side. I think that's their interpretation of the word control, which you can argue, but none of that would happen unless somebody was standing there taking the instruments out, changing the camera, cleaning the camera, because all those things still happen. So
it reminds me a little bit of the euphemism of calling napalm a defoliant. I mean, control, that's a tough one. That's a stretch, but okay.
Yeah, but no, I'm seeing it from the eyes of this side of the fence, in terms of the commercialization and how that mechanism and that industry sector works from our side of the core. But I mean, look, okay, let's take out the word control. Vision and dexterity, I think, are clearly defined as advantages, and they can be correlated to clinical benefits, for outcomes, etc. In some procedures, not all, of course. But in terms of control, maybe there could be a different descriptive word to be used in terms of having the ability to be able to have less reliance, in a sense, on maybe a first assistant retracting a bladder for 3 hours during a procedure, or whatever it may be.
So Vincent, what type of AI would you like to see in the next generation of robots? We talked about autonomy. What type are you more interested in? Augmented reality, vision? What do you think is the next, or the most important thing to focus on for the next generation of robots in regards to AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the dexterity stuff is perfected, right, and you have the control we're talking about, I think the value add of being able to alert the surgeon when they're entering a dangerous space, entering, they're taking additional risk that they may not need to with retraction or dissection, or they're going to be placing a clip a little bit closer to a branch point than they should. All those things mitigate risk, decrease complications, mishaps, and that's all software, right? That's all computer vision based software applications coupled to the robot.
Situation awareness.
Yeah, that marriage of software enhancement, situational awareness with enhanced dexterity and visualization. I like 3D stuff. By the way, I think there are certain people that are more predisposed to being able to do well in that 3D environment visually than others. It's a brain thing, right? And the surgical residents maybe could be trained a little better with
I think it takes practice too. I think that's also a problem where people are going fresh. All right, here's 3D. Like, you probably need you need to create those connections between neurons, as you say.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, Vincent.
No. I see. I'm a software guy, right? I'm on the software side, but the value adds that you can quickly bring to the table are traditionally in software, because hardware changes are expensive and take time, right? Every time you make a change to a piece of hardware that's FDA approved, you've got to resubmit things, right? It's an interesting dynamic. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering how far away we are from an organization developing like no-fly zone capabilities,
yeah,
and obviously to create the no-fly zone, the system would need to recognize what the structures are
sure.
that they're facing, or the surgeon's facing, in theory. So I think that's where huge value would be added, whether it's with a robot or laparoscopy or whatever it may be. I think that is the way ahead. That would make a remarkable difference. How easy is that? I don't know. I'm not. That's not my area of speciality. But I think that's what people are probably softly crying out for. To see that big jump in that technology.
So, we only have 4 minutes left, and I cannot resist. What do you guys think about the new, trying to be, the new FDA that's going to be entering into the United States, the new philosophy? Do you think that it's going to be a real shift, and it's a much better place to develop technology going forward? How is that going to affect developing in Europe? I know that's a tough question with less than 4 minutes to answer, but good luck.
Well, let me take the European side, and I'll allow Vincent to comment on the US. The European side is a complete mess. Everybody would agree. I've not found anybody in our industry that doesn't agree with that. Since the induction of MDR on the CE mark, it's like layered 10 layers of complexity, and it's like walking in a maze. You're never going to get out of it. There's always a T-junction or a dead end. That has to change, otherwise it will knock out a generation of development from European organizations and the ability to bring something to Europe. It really is. So now everybody says, let's just go to FDA. It's a lot easier. It never used to be. It used to be roles reversed. But I think they've gone way too far this time round. So in terms of any improvements or changes to the FDA, as long as they don't make it more complex, I think they're onto a winner by default. But I'll allow Vincent to comment on your question, Andrew.
No, I think we have pancreatic islet cell transplant guy, right out of Hopkins, as the new FDA, Dr. Macri, heading up the FDA. So he's going to bring a very different perspective to things here in the U.S. as a surgeon and
Great for us.
yeah, which is great. And this is part of the uncertainty of the new Trump administration. What will actually happen and take place, and who's going to control things? Big business traditionally doesn't like fostering a lot of startups to compete with them with innovation, but big companies like Stryker have seen the value in acquiring what small startups do because they're nimble, they move fast. So we may have an environment that fosters innovation for the big companies to acquire the innovation that comes out of interesting people working hard in an agile manner. So it may be the best of both worlds. It's certainly going to be an interesting landscape the next 6 months.
All right, Vincent, you're going to have to close us out. We're down to a little bit less than a minute.
Alan, thank you so much for joining the 58th podcast of our AI and Cybersurgery podcast. We are the only
welcome.
Dedicated to all things AI, by the way, Andrew. So that's our thing. But
no, it's been my pleasure, gentlemen, anytime. But yeah, great to do it.
Thanks. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. All right.